it's thinking cap time, it's connection time, it's thinking broadly and widely and deeply and smartly at the same time. We have heard brilliant conversations, thoughts, perspectives today, and it's been a really jam-packed day. So this is kind of a moment to knit some things together, and to also ask questions that are still,
right,
plaguing you. Mm-hmm. So Susan and Geoffrey are going to spark us with this lightning round and pull us all together into a conversation.
So as Lynn was just saying, it's been a very full day and many, many ideas starting, and a lot of data, both from Andreas and from, right out of my head, I know, Charlie, sharing the information about their programs, but then also listening to Professor Zhang talk about what they're doing in Shanghai and how they have systematized what it is that they've been doing. And, I know many of you have been visiting there for the last 20 years, and to see the progress that they've made is really amazing, going not just from the elite schools within the city, but moving out into the more rural areas and making sure that the same kind of practice was happening there and that the students were getting the same quality of education. So what we'd like to do now is just talk about how we put this together, because our panel, the final panel, was focusing on the United States, and we have both positive things to say and some negative things to say about where we are. But what can we learn from what we've heard today? I mean, Andreas had some positive things to say about the United States. We're not all in bad shape entirely, but I think that we do want to figure out what we can take away. What can we take home from this? What can Maisha carry back to the Young People's Project to tell those students who told her what she ought to talk about, what was talked about today, and what they need to know about their future based on the data that she's heard, the practices that have been described. So what would you say? Susan?
This is big picture. So I was thinking that in levels, that just as we've learned, you can't treat international education as a sort of a textbook for adopting individual practices. Mm-hmm. So we wouldn't go to Shanghai or Singapore and just take the textbook. That's not smart. So we've learned about the entire systems created to support change and to support the use of really good curriculum materials. But there's another question, which I wish I had paid more attention to when Charlie was talking, which is how you got the country to do the learning on the broader scale. And I think that's a question that I at least want to pay more attention to. I heard you talk about grants. I heard you talk about prepping the people who write the requests for proposals to write the right kind of grants. I heard you talking about developing a professional network to help influence politicians, and you've got it all there. I just didn't pay enough attention to it. Mm-hmm. And I think that when we study other countries, that's probably just as important. What were the levers that people used to create the broad scale kind of change? Sorry.
Charlie, you want to talk a little bit more about that? Well, and talk about it in the context of a new government comes in. What do you do now to maintain the program?
Okay, so I think that the programs that we run for the NCTM and the Maths Hubs are not compulsory for schools to engage with them. They don't have to do that at all. Mm-hmm. So we have to kind of win the argument, if you like. Mm-hmm. One of the things that really helped with that, which I talked about in my talk, was the Chinese teachers coming to England and observation of that, and people thinking, wow, I can really see that this might be something that's worth doing. So I think that part of the way it's been adopted nationally is by kind of winning the argument. I think that with at primary school level, I think that's happened pretty well, and I think that there's no kind of, we have very strong engagement for primary schools, and that's maintained. a secondary school to start with, we had a lot of suspicion because people felt that they were expert maths teachers in their own, already. How could they learn from a jurisdiction across the other side of the world? But again, I think that we've managed to partly through one of the things that's happening now is I talked about teachers observing Chinese teachers working in our classrooms. We're in a situation now where teachers become more mature, so we have teachers observing teachers in schools down the road that are implementing this kind of method, this pedagogy, and saying that this works. Another thing we're starting to do is that we have networks of school trusts in England, so like groups of schools that work together under one kind of leadership. The largest one is called United Learning, about 100 schools. Others vary from believe it or not, there are single school trusts, not many of those, but again, we're able to start to get kind of adoption of this kind of pedagogy throughout whole trusts, those kinds of things, because we've kind of, what we've shown has been convincing that learning is improving. You asked about what will happen with the election if things change. I think that the success of the Maths Hubs programme and the NCTM, and I quoted an Ofsted report, Ofsted Standards Education in Education.
Right.
I think that makes us a bit bulletproof, actually, to change of government. The thing that I'm worried about with change of government is that I've been really working hard to get Maths to AT, and the idea of helping young people to be able to use the maths they've learned in life and work and feel it's something that's empowering for them. And my worry about that is that it was picked up by the current Prime Minister as being a kind of a little flagship thing for him, and I worry there might be a knee-jerk reaction against that from the opposition, because they say that's a terrible idea that that lot had, and but I still feel that it's part of my job to try and manoeuvre to ensure that doesn't happen.
Right.
If I could just follow up, I'm sure you are planning of how to avert that. So. That is, I think, that if we were to start an exchange program between teachers in New York and teachers in the UK about math, an important part of those exchange visits would be in learning the kind of levers that Charlie was talking about to how to get the political change and the structural change and all the other things that support the system that you need.
Mm-hmm. And I think you probably could also get the business community more involved in your Maths by 18 because they see the need.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm sure the business community is probably the same in many countries. Our business community will complain a lot about maths education, but they don't really know what they want. Mm-hmm. But the core maths, like I described, the name is terrible again. I'm not responsible for these names. Core maths is awful, isn't it? But the idea of something that's very common for employers to say is the young people start work and they've got certificates that say they can do things, and actually they can't.
Right,
and
exactly.
The idea of core maths is to say, actually, you've learned some maths, you've learned some kind of skills in being able to learn about how maths works, but actually being able to apply maths is a higher level skill. So applying maths the level of maths that I think it's a general kind of truism that the level of maths that you can work effectively in an applied way is probably a couple of levels lower than the level of mathematics you've actually learned. And I think that we are winning with employers in the sense that they recognise that they want young people who are very functional in their maths, and so just being able to demonstrate you can answer questions on traditional maths exams isn't enough for that. And so we are beginning to get some leverage from employers to say, yes, this is what we want. And as I said in my talk, the universities in the degree programs that use quantitative techniques and use some maths but don't require maths as maths A level as an entry requirement, they also do. They are starting now to actively incentivise students to take core maths. But I think the thing that I worry about most with the election is whether we can win the argument for maths to age 18, because there's a massive teacher supply issue, and being able to address that requires quite a lot of imagination. Good use of technology, good use of blended learning. But it's really exciting. There's loads of great things that can come out of it. But it's just kind of a question of keeping the momentum going.
And Andreas, do you have any advice for us in dealing with the political issues that we're facing with what we should do, how we should do it?
Yeah, I think that it all comes down to the political economy. I really think that's always the hardest part in any education system. But I even think there are good areas of peer learning there. I actually do think the mass program in Britain is not something we could do anywhere in the world in a different way. I think just the more you can strengthen the profession at the front line, the less you worry about political volatility. People start to make political arguments when they do not own the science behind it. And I think this program has taken out ideological beliefs out of math education just by bringing people together to study with and from each other. How math education actually works. And I do think that's the best thing we can do: strengthen the foundations, building a stronger profession, and then the space for arbitrary political decisions will shrink. I think in a way, education with its very industrial approach has given almost 100% autonomy to political decisions. And the more I think we can build a stronger foundation, the less I would worry about it. And that's what we can observe around the world. If you look among education systems that have, and I think it's incredibly important for people at the front end as well. If you are a teacher in a classroom and you think that what you do will be determined by electoral cycles, by politicians, you're never going to change your behavior. You will just do what you've always done, but because 4 years later, somebody will go do the opposite. If you know that you have a trusted system and political decisions will slight shifts in that, you're gonna go along with that. Mm-hmm. So I think really that's your best bet.
Mm-hmm. Susan,
yes.
Could I add something to this?
Sure.
I didn't expect to speak about this, but after Charlie's comments, and as well as yours, I had a little bit of role in New York City's Board of Education, going from a separate board, independent board, to where Mike Bloomberg wanted in his second term when he was running. He wanted to get a second term, and he made school control the key element of his campaign. And Kevin Starkey, who was his number one guy in Albany, trying to get it, couldn't get it done. And I literally was sitting with the Senate leader, and I said, what's wrong with giving a guy who wants to be accountable, one guy, not a board, accountable, and he's not looking for any personal benefits? I mean, it was Mike Bloomberg after all. And so we had dinner and changed the Senate and gave Mike Bloomberg his second term. Now, of course, under the current administration, even if Scotty comes in, I don't think it's changing. Under this current administration, there is a loss when we had the Board of Education, where you had teachers among themselves and people fully invested in education, running the education system. It was actually more rubber meeting the road kind of administration, whereas now it becomes more political. So there is an interest now in Albany to return it back to a Board of Education. So, and as far as London is concerned, as long as education is made a national priority for people, it should stay out of the political arena.
So I wouldn't profess to understand the American education system properly, but some of the things I've been listening to, I wonder whether something like a Maths Hubs program with a pedagogy to promote, could that not work in a state in the US? And could it not be something that could be tried out? And if it worked, then perhaps it might influence what happens in other states as well. So perhaps that's a way of taking it forward.
Right. Yeah, in fact, that's what Cheng was just suggesting to me 30 minutes ago, that what we need to do is go into a state that might be interested, maybe Colorado, because they're very engaged with the Swiss companies and apprenticeships. Yeah. And I think that will make clear to the powers that be that, in fact, students are not well prepared particularly in mathematics, but in some other areas. And so this would be an additional thrust that would improve the collaboration and the preparation of the students at the same time.
I think another thing I'd say about England is that the politicians are really convinced. They've had studies done by economists that say that maths education is absolutely crucial to the future of the economy.
Absolutely.
And that isn't my motivation for being interested in maths education, but it certainly is theirs, and that's a very powerful lever.
Right.
There's another way this all can be viewed politically that I think is really interesting. your data, Andreas, about the immigrant achievement, it fits so perfectly with the data we've been learning about the economy and how immigrants contribute to our economic progress. But your data, the educational data, is not known. Nobody talks about it. So education can help us make important national arguments, larger arguments.
Can I just say one thing about this? I mean, one thing that really strikes me is that this is essentially a persuasion problem. So we need better ways to persuade, and we need to persuade different groups. And in the efforts to improve math education, some things have been very persuasive. They're not my favorite. So one thing that's been very persuasive is showing teachers who don't know math making mathematical errors. That has demonstrated that there's a real need for improvement there. It's not my favorite because I would like to show the opposite, which is the positive impact of teachers teaching math in ways that are really ambitious, where parents say, I want my kid in that classroom with that teacher. But it's a persuasion issue.
Aisha?
Sure. So I had a thought, I think, in response to Yvonne's comment and your question to Yvonne, which she said that 70,000 future teachers pass through the math departments, undergraduate math departments of the country. And the country isn't organized to get those math departments to understand how to work together to produce good math teachers. The country is organized around how to get the math departments to produce research mathematicians and to support mathematical research. I think there's maybe 6 institutions in the country that are focused on that and that do that. But there's maybe an opportunity there to organize around organizing math departments to focus a lot more deeply on supporting the production of the math teaching force in the country.
You want to suggest some ways we might do that? Funding.
I mean, I think what Maisha said is right. There's no central organization for math faculty invested in teacher education, or at least not any organizations that that are well funded and that would be able to move the needle in any significant way, given the context that we've all heard about today. But it is based. If you look at the National Teacher and Principal Survey, then if I use the 2011 numbers, because those are the most recent, and my estimate is that math departments probably influence about 70,000 teachers per year through their mathematics courses. And I think that it would just be such a remarkable thing if we could have math faculty work together and in collaboration with educators for how to develop the best possible mathematical education of teachers.
Something that we're talking about in England, and which is likely to start in the next couple of years, is a teacher degree apprenticeship. So a maths teacher degree apprenticeship. The idea is it will be a 4-year program, and it wouldn't be you get a degree in maths education, so you wouldn't get a mathematics degree. Probably the level of mathematics that you would do would probably go to maybe the end of a first-year undergraduate course, maybe slightly further than that. But the idea is that you'd have a small amount of time in your first year in school. Most of your time would be learning maths at university, and that would decrease over time. So in your final year, you'd be spending most of your time in school and just a little bit of time in the faculty at the university. But the carrot for this is that the need is such to get more secondary maths teachers that I think that the government is proposing that the student fees will be waived. So that's a major incentive for people to do this. The idea is that it might attract people who are age 18 going into this. It might also attract people who are return to learn, older people with more life experience coming back to do something like that. it's not been done yet. It's an idea that I think maybe it's got some legs, and I think it will happen. But I can't say whether it's going to work or not because it hasn't been done yet. But I think the idea is a good idea. It's got potential.
And then you'd have to create a cadre of schools for them to work in that will prepare them. So it's into your schools that are doing this.
Okay, an idea I have around this is that we have, particularly around many of our cities have got universities that could lay on programs like this. They've also got serious problems with teacher shortage. And I think I can imagine that you might almost be killing two birds with one stone by doing this, because and something else which I think there is some evidence for. There's a city in England called Stoke-on-Trent. It used to have a very heavy potteries industry, which is gone completely. It's a place with very high unemployment, very high levels of deprivation. But they have a university nearby, and they had a real project there to try to improve maths education, because they were really close to the very bottom of local authority performance in maths education in England. And through working with the university and through working collaboratively in the city, and including working with the Maths Hub, they've kind of turned things around. Or they certainly had pre-COVID. That's another issue. But they went from that place identity really matters. And I think there's scope there for doing well. Lots of potential.
Yeah. Well, and I would think that you would put them into your math hubs so that you can promise them that they are going to have good experiences in their teaching with teachers who are well prepared, so that they can continue on. Yeah. Any other ideas that we might want?
It's not an effective strategy. So, specifically with regard to math, I don't know, because I think that the math issues, I don't know that there's a great answer on that one. I mean, I think that the idea of holding kids back from accelerating is very unpopular, and that is unpopular, I think, across the political distribution. So if that is your argument, that's something that you want to pursue for whatever reason, I think you need a way to sell that is not going to, in particular, freak out privileged parents who are worried about their kids getting into elite colleges, which is really the tail that wags the dog of this entire conversation. So I guess that's kind of the main thing that I'm thinking about. I'm wondering what will happen. There's so much focus right now on the science of reading and that curriculum issue, and I would just anticipate that there will be something similar on math. I just don't know what that will look like.
Well, as Roberta was saying, her children are in a school that's using a version of Singapore math. I didn't realize that that's how they characterize Eureka Math. Many schools around the country are using that program, and I've never heard it described as Singapore Math before, which is interesting. But I think that the challenge there has been the same challenge that we're facing in other circumstances, namely that teachers are finding it difficult to teach the curriculum because they don't know the mathematics underlying the curriculum. And so they're trying to just move forward, and in the program they say, oh, we never review, we never go back. We're just going to move forward, and I'm wondering how that might work.
And one thing I think I touched on very briefly is this issue of teacher curriculum supplementation, which is a very pervasive phenomenon in the U.S. And I think the data that we have suggests that all teachers supplement, or very close to all teachers supplement, but they supplement for different reasons. And for the Eureka, they tend to supplement to backfill on procedures. So the worksheets and the drills that they're not getting in the curriculum, that's what they do. For a different kind of curriculum, they supplement for different reasons. But I think that's definitely an important part. And I just think that I do think that this issue of teacher curriculum supplementation is another area to work on. Teachers on the one hand, I think teachers like to do that and view it as part of their identity. On the other hand, I think teachers do want a quality core curriculum that they can rely on for the vast majority of their instruction. But if they're seeing that it's not working for their kids, they're not gonna just move right along, right? And so there needs to be some way to support teachers to supplement less and better. I think that's like a strategy that I will be pursuing. I don't know how to do that.
So we need to help Yvonne create an organization that will get our mathematics departments together to recognize that there is a value to working collaboratively across the country to have an impact on the quality of teaching of mathematics. I think that the science of mathematics, I agree with you, is coming, and the question is who's going to define it. And I think that too could be something that the universities could take on as the kind of the holders of the the holders of the Holy Grail, the ones who really understand mathematics, as opposed to the rest of us who have sketchy backgrounds in this area. But I think that both of those are worth doing, and I wonder how we can encourage that to happen. We've got 2 universities represented here, so Lynn, you can go back to Boston College and talk with your
I'll talk
folks.
to Lily. Perfect.
Yeah, so we can possibly have a future meeting where we start to bring some key people together to talk about this, because unless we solve the mathematics problem in this country, we're not going to prepare the young people to be successful in a world that's getting more and more complex every day. And if we can also convince the business community that this is something they ought to support because it's their future as well as the future of the country.
So is the major roadblock teachers not knowing what to teach?
Well, it's partly not understanding mathematics themselves, not having had a good preparation.
So then why are they teaching math if they don't understand what they're teaching?
Because
But
they're
the art of
elementary school
teaching,
teachers who are expected to teach everything.
And high school teachers.
And some high school teachers who...
And teacher shortages.
Right.
And university preparation, that's where teachers get their math from.
Right.
I mean, it's owned, the problem is owned by many people in many places. And that's part of what we've been talking today, is kind of the systemic nature of reform, improvement, progress is something that bypasses this country.
Can I just say one thing on this, though? I think it's important to be careful that it is the case that the issue is often that teachers don't understand the math well enough. But where we often go is saying teachers are the problem,
Right.
as if we could go find other people out there who could just be brought in. Like, hey, there's accountants, they know math. Actuarials, you know.
Yeah, people are shopping into this.
And the fact is, they often don't know the math. They need to know to teach it well either. And the reality, when you really look at American math teachers, is they know math in ways that are a lot more sophisticated than most American adults. You can't just go find a cadre of people off the street. So I want to be really careful, you know, in going to a place that we need to get rid of the bad teachers we have and somehow replace them with some other magical group. It really ends up being a development problem.
Absolutely.
The problem is developing teachers with the knowledge and skills they need to teach effectively.
Yeah, I'm not saying throw them out, I'm saying help them. Charlie?
I wanted to really reiterate that I mean, what we have in maths teaching is a situation where demand exceeds supply, but without the solution of putting the price up so the supply gets higher. We can't do that because that isn't how it works. So what we need to do is to really invest in the teachers that we've got, and actually those teachers really do want to be invested in. They're really up for this. They don't enjoy not understanding maths really well as they'd like to. They'd rather learn more and be better at it. And that's certainly what we discovered in England, that they're really up for having the development.
If I might, you know, I have not been a professor for a long time, but I did teach about 40 years ago. I was one of the youngest law professors in the country. And I know a little bit about this problem because you have to have teachers who must be masters of the field that they're teaching. And even if they are masters of the field, that's not really the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail then starts with the art of teaching. Just because you know something doesn't mean you can explain it, okay? And how you explain it, where this person who's listening to you gets it and remembers it for life, not regurgitated for reports and exams, but actually gets it, that's the art of teaching. So I think that, to your point, Jeff, that you're not going to get someone else other than teaching. That's the army of education. So we have to invest in teachers. And the major difference in the European American system, which is predominant, versus the Japanese system of education, because I had this conversation, I think I mentioned to you about, last time I was the Secretary of Education was in the 80s. Japan has a very unique formula for teaching, which is they take their very best people and they don't let them go into Wall Street. They put them into the college and professors because they believe that a classroom is a maternity ward incubating more genius. So if you get a genius in there, you get more. So the teachers are the highest paid people in Japan. And so really that's the paradigm shift. Got to put money where our mouth is. Okay, that's it.
Yes, we certainly have not done that.
And that's, anyone else want to add in? Misha?
Yeah, this goes
I got
back almost 4 decades.
Yeah.
I left all this stuff.
So I'm going to maybe go out on a limb here a little bit. The Young People's Project is not in the business of producing teachers.
Right.
However, those young people who do come through the Young People's Project and choose to go into teaching are amazing teachers, because they've already been teaching starting in 9th grade, and they teach through high school and then through college, and by the time they hit a teacher education program, one, they know that they want to be a teacher, and they know how hard it is, right, around dealing with their peers. Don't make it easier for them just because they're their peers, right? And so one thing that I have thought, and it's a huge if, but if something like a state might choose to invest in thousands of its young people to be near peer literacy workers, some percentage of those will be teachers, and they will be amazing teachers. And along the way, they will help each other, right? They will deal with the problem of, the kids don't know how to multiply.
Can I just say one thing to follow up on that? One interesting movement here in the States, which is growing very, very rapidly, and many people haven't heard about because it's so new, is often referred to as grow your own. It's not a great label because it includes a ton of different initiatives. It's hard to even say what it is. But Meisha, it includes exactly the kind of efforts you're talking about. From their perspective, that's a recruiting move. You get young people as early as middle school interested in teaching through a whole variety of different mechanisms. You get them involved in doing it, you get them into classrooms, you provide support, and they become a recruited cadre. You engage in other kinds of recruiting. But other components that are really interesting are efforts to really increase and really reorganize how preparation happens by putting in-school, full-time paid apprenticeships at the very center of preparation, and then organizing the coursework to support the on-the-job learning components. Now, that could go well or badly. The story hasn't been written yet, but it is happening and starting to happen at scale. And then the general idea, somebody was just saying about staying in your communities and how appealing that is. These programs are called Grow Your Own because they're promoting local individuals to teach in the schools they're trained in. They understand the context, they understand the community, they have some connections, which is at least thought to promote retention. So we talk about the shortage being a problem of teachers coming in. It's also a problem of teachers leaving at the other end, right? So you intervene on it through retention as well. And so, I think, while that's not a math reform, it certainly could be. And thinking about how to be creative in investing in some of these programs that are really gaining tremendous interest. So whatever the kind of policy persuasion problem is already been dealt with here. The question is, can we capitalize on this in interesting ways?
Yeah, it grew out of the Future Teachers of America clubs at high school level. And it is a way of interesting students, and it is used more in smaller communities where they want to keep those young people coming back to their community rather than going off to college and on to New York or Chicago or someplace else.
Right.
And I think it does have promise. One of our challenges is that I talked to an audience at an ASCD meeting and said, how many of you are teachers? Most hands go up. How many of you recommend to your students that they become a teacher? Very, very few. And that's one of our challenges, is that we have to improve the environment in which our teachers are teaching so that they see this as a positive career move and therefore are willing to recruit their students to it. And I think that's all part, and why I think getting the business community supporting our schools to a larger degree, allowing students and teachers to come in as summer interns, to learn about the business, to learn what kinds of skills they're expected to have, is a way to address this problem.
Can I just, we're not supposed to be,
Jeff,
I'm not going to,
I'm
going to hand it off.
Yeah, please. No, I wanted it because, I'm so glad that Sid asked me to get to know you, and of course he didn't expect me to fall in love with you, which I did, Chang Davis. But I'm watching who you've collected, the educational leaders around the world. And we're on this topic. You have Jeff Phelps from ETS. You can have Einsteins running around, and Wall Street doesn't know what to do with them. You get ETS involved, they know exactly what to do because they talk the same language. So whatever you come up with as a solution, he's the delivery mechanism, okay? Because ETS is literally where you will cross the bridge from all this amorphous stuff of education, which nobody's got time to understand, because they're busy, the belt. He puts, ETS makes it all work. So having him here, Chang, really pulls your power of your convening power is really amazing. So I just wanted to applaud you for that. And you too, of course.
Well, I think ETS could play a role. I'll follow up that way. I just also want to make a plug for the Grow Your Own. One thing that we know a lot about is that our teaching workforce, at least in this country, I'm assuming it's an issue in other countries, is not diverse. It is predominantly white. Teachers of color are just grossly underrepresented, while our student body becomes more and more diverse every year. There is absolutely convincing evidence that students who have been underrepresented, black and brown students, benefit from having teachers who share their background, and benefit in all kinds of different ways. They benefit academically, they benefit in terms of their persistence through their programs, really on almost any measure. And so I also think, as we kind of think about the teaching and teacher issue here, we want to be thinking about programs that are successful at diversifying the workforce, as well as thinking about all these issues we've been talking about around teacher quality and teaching competence. In fact, I would go as far as to say that diversity is a component of teaching quality. We shouldn't be talking about teaching quality on the one hand and teacher diversity on the other. A qualified workforce is a diverse one. So I just want to make a plug because that is one thing that will have a big impact on student achievement in schools, is really making sure that our workforce is more diverse.
Angel's got a
Yes,
question.
Angel?
Oh, I'm just curious. I have a question for Andreas. So, thank you, Susan. I'm just curious. I did hear earlier from Andreas' speech that you mentioned about the perspective of teachers feeling comfortable to talk to parents are very different across the world. You know, how it differs from Israel to Finland. And how is what we were talking about the social status of teachers like in a global context?
We're losing all of our mics.
Yeah, actually, and I think this is a really interesting point because actually the status of the teaching profession and the social capital that teachers have in society are very closely connected. Now we have actually, I hear, you know, the call for improved teacher salaries, and I think in the US, you know, you have a point. But at the same time, you know, it's very little of a relationship between teacher pay and the status of the teaching profession. You know, money is always an extrinsic demotivator. If you don't pay people well, they go to run away. It's rarely an intrinsic motivator for getting the kind of people you want into a profession. And at least cross-national, you don't find much of a relationship. Where you do find a relationship is exactly on the points that you have highlighted. You know, it's the connections that teachers have with their students, the connections that teachers have with each other, the collaborative culture, the connections they have with parents and society. The more social capital you can build and back as a teacher, the higher, you know, your status in society, but also the higher the job satisfaction. One of the things from our Thales survey that we found most interesting was that the more teachers, you know, observe each other's classes, the more they engage in collaborative professional development, the more they are part of a profession, the happier they were with their job. And again, that isn't the reflection of the status they have in society. So actually, I think strengthening relationships with the students, with the parents, with society is probably our best bet. Rather than if you just raise everybody's salaries, I don't think anything is going to change. Teaching is not going to be attracting a different caliber.
But we should raise salaries.
I agree with that.
It is definitely not.
I agree with that. But I think the idea that that's going to change the status of the teaching profession, I think is too. I think you need to do a lot more things.
But you're talking about people who love being teachers. So whether you pay them nothing, or you pay them a little bit, or you pay them a lot, they still love teaching. So, but that's a unique subset of teachers. Not every teacher loves teaching.
But they still have to buy the groceries.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So
whether they love it or not.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's 5:05, so I think it's time to close this meeting. It's been a very interesting and productive day, and I'm going to come back to Yvonne and Misha and try and start something with our universities to focus on this question, because I think that is something that we could do, something that we could interest departments in. And so we'll stay in touch on that. But thank you all so much for being here, being speakers, being collaborators with us. We appreciate what you've done. And I had mentioned at our table that we're going to take these tapes and we're going to try and edit them a little bit so that we could create some webinars out of them. We'll send them to you for your review before we do anything, because it's your intellectual property. But it is too rich an opportunity to just have for this small group. And so we want to magnify it as we can. So thank you, Lynn, for moderating.